we can lose everything tomorrow financially, so we can lose everything physically. It's really, no matter what you do and how much you prepare, you're not going to be prepared for everything because we are being refined. We are being polished up. But our skill sets, I will say this, no matter what happens, your skill sets are the most valuable thing that you will have, and it will create wealth for you in destruction and catastrophic events. And you will become the most valuable person by your skill sets. And that's something that you can never lose.
What if the truth came in a gel cap and we could just pop it in our mouths and forget about it? Well, it doesn't, and we can't. But we can laugh in the face of reality while plotting our survival. Welcome to the Truth Tastes Funny podcast. I am your host, Hersh Rephun, and if my guests can handle the truth, so can you. Open wide, folks. Here it comes. With us today on Truth Tastes Funny is Robyn Peterson. Robyn is known as a clandestine healer and is really quite famous for her ability to see into what is likely to happen, and also to kind of tell us how people are likely to behave. And it's a fascinating subject, and I don't want to steal too much of her thunder. She's been her appearances are honestly too numerous to even detail here, and I think that it would be great to learn as much about her as we can. She began as a gospel healer, and so welcome to the show. Welcome to Truth Tastes Funny, Robyn, and I really appreciate your being here with us.
Oh, I'm excited about this. I think this is going to be funny and entertaining, but also deep all at the same time. So let's get to it.
Well, that's kind of how we do it. I don't think that without comedy and humor that we can digest the truth. It kind of helps the truth go down, and that's where we get the Truth Tastes Funny from. But tell us how you came to be aware of your gifts.
Oh, as a young child, I noticed that I started to have premonitions in real time when I was awake. So, like, I would see something and I'd say, "Oh, this is about to occur," almost like a deja vu.
Uh-huh.
And then as I got older, I started to have more kind of what people would call prophetic dreams. And sometimes they'd be very disturbing, and then I would see them on the news. And then that's when I really started to catch on that it was a little different. I just assumed everybody was that way. And to be honest, I feel that most people are that way. But a lot of times it's very subtle that most people would dismiss it. Whereas I paid attention to it, sought it out, and then I inquired of it. And then I got skill sets and started to really train and develop what spiritual capabilities I had, what I could do with them, what limitations I had. And so for the years, I was really into the healing arts. But first, I started out with preparing people for catastrophic events. So, governments building underground facilities, things like that, firearm training, survival training. And there's a lot of doom and gloom in that. So, nobody wanted to hear about all the good miracles that came with events. So, I kind of got out of that side of it. And then I went more into the healing side. So, I became a holistic doctor, a homeopathic, an herbologist, all of that stuff. So I have a very broad spectrum of skill sets, but I did start seeing them very early on.
And it seems that that we are prone to believe negative things, but we're much more suspicious about things that are positive in some ways. I don't know if that's just our conditioning, but when you've been called upon to consult, it seems like, and you have deep survival training. You are really, this is not like just a passing thing that you did. It seems you really went deep on all of these preparations and abilities in survival. How do you kind of balance that threat, the idea of a constant threat, with preparedness and, an outlook that is, positive.
Well, I think as a lot of people, especially as they become parents, the anxiety levels of the possible threat really starts to escalate. So, anytime I tell someone that they have a fear or they're worried about a very specific cause or disaster, the best way to prepare for that is to get prepared for that,
Yeah.
to look into it, to get training for it. So, like if I had a fear of somebody breaking into my house, then I'm not going to let that fear consume me or put me into a box. Instead, I'm going to have scenario based training for that scenario. So you could do, there's so many things. Now, let's just say somebody's broke and they don't have the ability to get training. Then they can watch a million videos. They can get books as a resource guide. There's a lot of things that we can do because it gets overwhelming thinking you have to be prepared for everything. I would say there's three scenarios that could happen to you that you could be prepared for, whether that's training, education, setting your home up for an invasion, and running scenarios in your mind. And then what happens is that fear starts to go away. You're like, you know what? I'm as prepared as I can be. And that's good enough. But when people start to brush it under the rug and just hope that something like that won't happen, that fear will never go away. And they didn't do anything about it. And every time I've trained someone, they'll say, "Oh, I spiritually had a prompting. I had a feeling that I was supposed to do this. I knew I should have had training. I wanted to get a gun. I wanted to get supplies. I wanted to get all these things and I didn't listen." And
Hmm.
everybody has those spiritual promptings. It's just whether they listen to them or not. But really, it could be fun. It doesn't have to be, crazy and scary and expensive and all those things. It could be very, very fun for a family to start training for things.
And that was kind of the impetus in a way behind Truth Tastes Funny, where it was, if we just accept it, then, we're going to be less afraid of it. That's the hope. Once we accept something is real, we have to act, right? We have to move forward. I'm interested personally in dreams, because I've always had very, very vivid dreams, even as recently as last night. And sometimes they're, you know, unsettling. Quite often they're unsettling, or just they're not what I would consider to be premonitions. They tend to involve the people in my own, life, but very bizarre, very bizarre dreams, and as early as I could remember, from 6 or 7 years old. What do you what When you hear that, like, what does that
Well,
conjure?
I think there's many different spiritual gifts, and dreams could be one of them. And if you're already having vivid dreams that are weird or whatever, but they're vivid, and you notice the difference between some of them, right? Some of them, there was something to it. You
Yeah.
might not know what, and that's okay. But inquiring of it is where the difference is. And so that could be a spiritual pursuit. That could be, God. That could be your heavenly family. That can be spirit guides, your past loved ones that you could communicate with verbally and ask them, inquire of it. Because they're like, oh, great, I got his attention now.
Yeah.
Because the spiritual side of things, they never want to overwhelm us. They give us little things to see if we will inquire of it. Do we want this? And for you, particularly, if you're dreaming about things so vividly, then there could be a lot of things in there that you're missing. So, I would wake up in the morning and Google, what's the spiritual symbolism of something you saw in your dream? Like if you saw a polar bear in your dream and you're like, that was weird, but you felt like something was to it, then you could Google spiritual symbolism of a polar bear and you're going to
Yeah.
get some answers. And then things are going to start kind of clicking. The more you look into things, the more information you'll receive. So if it's scary or kind of a repetitive dream, it's always going to show you something that's not healed in you. And that's
Okay.
really important. So
And
people just they really need to seek it out. And there's so many different ways of doing that.
well, that's what I think is the thing that's very interesting to me, is that it isn't, it's up to us what we do with it. like sometimes you just have a dream, whatever it might be, or feeling, an instinct, you have a little deja vu. People, we get those things all the time. You just kind of brush it off. Um, this particular one last night was just very bizarre. It was very bizarre. This very, very close friend of mine was being very silly, and he can be silly, but he's extremely successful. So there's something about why he popped into my head. But he hit me on the head with like with like a book of some kind, like this type of a little journal or something. And that sensation where you get where you it's almost like something happened, like you feel like something
You
just
could feel
happened,
it. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you wake up for and I hadn't intended to put this forth to you. I had no idea I was going to have that dream. But I was
Well,
like,
let me
wow,
ask
that's
you, in real life, is he always trying to share knowledge with you? Is he trying to mentor you?
um yeah, I mean,
Does he try to push you?
yes. Yes, yeah. Yeah, I think he does.
And see the symbolism of him hitting you in the head with a book, and a book has a source of knowledge in it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. These things are fascinating simply because whatever the meaning is, it's beyond whatever we are conditioned or taught to understand, which is another thing I wanted to ask you about is to what extent is our uh education, child rearing, things like that, influencing what we are and are not prepared to explore.
It all matters. But what people don't see is why they are here in this dispensation of time, why they have these parents, these siblings in this city. And what they don't understand is that they chose this before they got here. They chose their
Mm,
parents, no matter how good or bad they were. There was a supernatural experience that you needed to have in your own exaltation process, your own growth. And so the trauma, the belief system, all of it matters. But once you get to a point where we're at this age and we're trying to process, it's like that finding the silver lining in it. So I call it either the slow track or the fast track. So everybody's got some kind of trauma, right? And that can determine where we go in life, like our saying, in our environments, our beliefs, whatever. And that can really slow us down to our destination. Now, the destination's always the same,
right.
but you want to get there quicker or you want to get there slower. And once you can realize that you can manipulate that, your fast track or your slow track, that's where the real power is. That's what people talk about, like manifesting or coming out of the matrix or really understanding where your power is. And it's really it's the same destination, slow track or fast track.
That's the part that I am trying to break through that, where I realize
Aren't we
because
all?
if you hear it from enough people also, and yes, I've talked to some, quantum consciousness accelerators, and I've been exploring more of that stuff. But still, when people say, oh, you could be here or you could be there, and it's a little baffling because intellectually even if we accept that, we aren't actually necessarily privy to it, and I suspect it has a lot to do with fear, whatever, however you want. How do you categorize fear? Where do you put fear uh, as an element?
Me personally,
Sure.
well, I think that there's a healthy fear of a lot of things. And to remove fear is, I think, almost impossible because if you're turning something off, one thing off, you're going to be turning off multiple things because that's a mastering of a skill set. So if somebody's like, I've eliminated fear and they're out doing a bunch of adrenaline kind of junky things, you're going to notice that emotionally there's some things that are turned off too. And
Uh-huh.
so I don't ever think that that's really the goal. Now, a healthy level of fear in all of those categories, being hurt physically or emotionally or spiritually or financially is good. Because if we didn't have fear, we'd probably be just jumping off a bridge.
Right. Right.
We'd just be like, let's just go see what's after this. And that healthy level of fear is what keeps a lot of people from not committing suicide, from not
Well,
risking it all and putting it all on the line.
a-
We do it in increments. So I think
and
it's okay to have fear.
I agree. I think that, caution and wisdom and forethought are all, things that keep us protected. I think that's what makes it a slippery slope, is that we feel like, oh well, if we let our fears get the better of us, then we'll never do anything. And I guess that's possible. Um, I had submitted the question to you, I said political leaders and decision makers, the people who seem to have our fate in some ways in their hands. What
Mm.
can we expect? What can we expect of people in those positions?
Interesting enough, people in those positions are the things that change timelines.
Uh,
And, when I am looking dimensionally at things and timelines and future events, they're the only ones that can change those events. And the reason why is because they're the only ones that can take away choice and agency to choose for ourselves, which is a manipulation for good or for bad. So let's just say a catastrophic event is I see it in the future. Well, if somebody of influence, especially political people, make a different decision, they can change that timeline.
mm,
Or you could get a ton of people praying and meditating to change an event, which doesn't happen. So that's why people of influence politically have so much power. And so when they take away our agency to choose for ourselves and they manipulate us with unrighteous desires, unrighteous manipulations, period, they that's almost when divine intervention comes in place, where something really big happens and, whether that's a natural disaster or whatever, and they never took that into account, which I find very interesting. All my years of working with the government and preparing for events, they would never take into account divine intervention.
right. Yeah, because they
And I'm
maybe
like, you
have.
can do all these things, but something will intervene, something will happen because you can't play with that many agencies of people without some type of intervention.
Well, there's something to be said for the notion that some people who manage to attain power don't give in to those, elements, right? They don't believe that God is more, there's whatever that divine presence is more powerful
Right.
than them. They have to that extent an inflated sense of, self-importance and power, but it's those people who manage to get power, because people who are more humble don't often uh have what it takes to do battle out in that arena. Sometimes they do, but
Yeah.
quite often.
I, I think it's because they can't measure it too. So they just try to completely dismiss it.
Yeah.
I mean, they can't prepare for it.
Yeah. And so now, looking at the planet, you know, speaking of people having power to do or not do certain things, what's your take on the Earth, which would seem to be a fairly existential topic?
Well, I look at things much differently than a lot of people, and the earth is not weak, and
Okay.
the earth is not crying and weeping, and but the earth is fully capable and strong and powerful and beautiful, and it's almost being held back from its glory, from its power, just like a lot of us, what we call like sleeping giants.
Hmm.
And there will come a day very soon where it will not be held back. And when that day comes, that's when we've crossed the line, which we are very, very close to right now. And a lot of things will happen very rapidly in that healing process. And that's where a lot of those catastrophic events will come in. And so where we are politically, unfortunately, worldwide, is affecting that timeline of the earth responding. And again, that's a form of divine intervention.
Yeah. Yeah, and on the flip side of that are those who, like you pointed out, either don't believe in that power or ignore it, have convinced themselves that it's not going to happen on their, on their watch or their timeline or whatever it is they think. And and I do, my wife works in climate actions. I'm fairly, familiar with a lot of that, a lot of what's going on, and there's no real surprises. There's not there's no nobody should be any shocked by what's happening. But when you look at you when you see so many things, when you have the vision to see so many things, what do you do to work on your mindset to make things as good as they can possibly be, other than preparedness, which you mentioned, but what, emotionally?
Years ago, when I was really focused on future events and possibility of certain things taking place, I did go through a period of time where I mourned.
Mm.
And I mourned loss of friends and family and, part of our human family. And because I knew that there was nothing I could do, nothing I could say, a lot of us take on this responsibility of we need to wake people up. And that's a huge burden. And it also doesn't really help because what we're trying to do is force manipulation onto others. I want you to see what I see, know what I know, believe what I believe. And that's a form of manipulation by force. Even if you're right, it doesn't matter. So if I know of certain events or I know, let's just say that I believe that vaccines are harmful and you believe that they are not, so that they could save your life. There is no point in me trying to show a bunch of facts to you or trying to justify my thinking onto yours.
Right.
Unless you're on the fence and you're really seeking information, then there's an opportunity there where I can show some things and you might change your mind. But the majority of people are trying to force and wake people up because they think they're going to prevent something. They think that the more people wake up, the more people that do this, that we have a chance here. And that's not true. We've already passed a point of no return. And all we're doing is driving more of a divide. And so,
Yeah.
really accepting things as they are and accepting that people are where they are by choice gives me the sense of peace. And I'm okay. I've come to terms through mourning years ago that people are going to make their decisions, whether that's to live or die or thrive, and that's okay. I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to want to change it. I just am loving where everybody is and what they're choosing to. I'm grateful that they can choose between vaccinations and non-vaccinations, being prepared, not being prepared, being spiritual and not being spiritual, listening and not listening. I'm okay with all of it now, but emotionally, it took me a long time to get there.
Yeah. I mean, that it's interesting because in pointing that out, you're striking a hopeful note in the sense that, well, it's not like there's nothing we can do any day. There's not like there's nothing we can do to love. There's nothing we can do to be close to people or to make people's lives better. There's plenty that we can do. What I guess we can't really do is change the course of history at this point, beyond a certain amount, really, which, like you pointed out, we've made choices. We haven't, none of these things were thrust upon us with no warning. So what,
Right?
whatever divinity's interest in interceding is, it's not without warning. It's never without warning, it seems to me.
It's true. I call it practice.
Yeah.
Like we always get practice, practice relationships, practice jobs, practice careers, practice in catastrophic events, even.
Yeah.
And when COVID happened the first time, I told everybody this is practice and you guys better pay attention. Pay attention to how people are behaving, what they're purchasing, how your neighbors are acting, the divide. Pay attention to what you have and what you don't have. And pretty soon something was going to happen that's not going to be practice. So I hope that people really took that as an opportunity. And there's a lot of that. There's, like you said, there's not without warning. We
Yeah.
all have the warning. It's if we're choosing to listen or not. That's all.
And as we kind of circle around to your own personal experience, what is your day-to-day, your pursuit, your focus right now?
You know, I always have three different timelines for myself because I can see how things change. So I have one exit strategy of timeline if this happens. And then I have one if this happens. And then I have one if this happens.
Uh-huh.
And where my career is and where I am with my investments, and then where I am spiritually, mentally, and with my family. And so all of those things I'm always working on because three of those timelines can happen at any time. So I have to plan for a future. I have to plan if there's not a future. And that future just, it's not that things are going to end, they're just going to dramatically change. And so it's a different thing where my career wouldn't matter at all. My investments don't matter at all. So we can't think one way or another because it's just like somebody who's super spiritual and woo woo, right? And
Yeah.
they talk about all this dimensional cool stuff and past lives. And I'm like, cool. Now nobody can relate to you. Who are you serving?
Right.
You're
Right.
way out there, right? It's the same thing as somebody who's a prepper. They have all this food storage and all these guns and all this stuff, and they're just like hunkering down, waiting. Great. Nobody can relate to them. Who are they serving?
Yeah.
So, going into extremes of all of that, but is harmful. It isolates you, whether it's spiritually or whatever. So having a good balance of those strategies is key. And having a little laughter about it is even better. Like
Yeah.
we can lose everything tomorrow financially, so we can lose everything physically. It's really, no matter what you do and how much you prepare, you're not going to be prepared for everything because we are being refined. We are being polished up. But our skill sets, I will say this, no matter what happens, your skill sets are the most valuable thing that you will have, and it will create wealth for you in destruction and catastrophic events. And you will become the most valuable person by your skill sets. And that's something that you can never lose.
Mm. Yeah. Well, that's a great thought to kind of end the conversation with, because that puts so much in everybody's hands who is listening. All they really need to do is focus on expanding your skill set. And we learn that in business. We learn it, if you're essential, that they need you, they can't do it without you, you know. The same is true in any situation. Um, well, Rob, I really appreciate your being on the show. And where can people find you?
Probably the best way is just to go right to my website, which is amazingrobyn with a Y.com. And me or my assistant or somebody from my team will get right back to you. And I can always take a look at people individually where I can see what's going on with them in their mind, their families, their careers, their companies, or in their timelines in the future. If anybody wants to know what's getting in the way of their potential, mentally, physically, spiritually, sexually, it doesn't matter. I can see that and I can help them. Either I can heal it or I can tell them exactly what to do to help heal themselves.
Thanks so much for tuning into Truth Tastes Funny. If you enjoyed the experience, please leave a 5-star review and share this podcast with your friends.